Okay, so we are live with the Node.js release working group meeting on the 10th of September 2020. We will start working through the agenda, which is in the Node.js release GitHub repository, and it's issue 609. And to start off, are there any announcements anyone has to make?
No, I'm trying to get a 14.10.1 release out, so hopefully that'll be done by either the end of this meeting or later today.
Cool, thanks, Richard. Any other announcements? Nope. So moving on to the first item on the agenda, I added this one onto the agenda. It's doc update backport requirements on the LTS release lines. So this kind of stemmed from a PR being opened, backport PR being opened for a feature that was tagged with backport requested v10.x. And what's kind of happened here is we've tagged it with backport requested v10.x back when 10 was in active LTS. And the label hasn't been removed, possibly because we don't have a process in place to do that when something transitions from active into maintenance. So a PR has been opened, and then immediately we've kind of said we're not looking to add new features to Node 10 as it's in maintenance. So the question is, should we update documentation to say do not open backport PRs for things that are in maintenance, or do we want to add some kind of process to audit what's labeled backport requested for a particular release line as it goes between active and maintenance? I don't know if there's any history there that I'm missing what we've done before for like Node 8 and such.
So I think that there's like a couple options here. I think one thing that's worth kind of pointing out is, well, this is like a sharp edge that someone has run into. We've been running this LTS program for years, and it's the first time that it's happened. I know that our immediate reaction to hitting a sharp edge is to create process around making sure it doesn't happen again. But I also always think it's good to step back and ensure, hey, we're not like creating an overly large amount of process. I think historically, there's value in having those labels, in like continuing to know like what things have not landed on a branch is not totally useless. A super easy way to clean it up if we don't plan to ever use those labels again is to simply delete the label, and then that removes it from everything. Or alternatively, change the name of the label if we want to keep those for historical purposes. So it's possible that like a very simple thing that we could do here would be to, at the point that a release moves into maintenance, that we change the name of the label from backport requested to perhaps not backported to, or like, you know, some other label that keeps the historic like labeling that we know that things, you know, like had been requested and didn't land, which may be very helpful if, for example, we have like a security thing that we're trying to patch, and that helps us understand like what landed and what didn't. Or if we need to audit the branch, like those labels are still helpful without giving people the wrong impression that we're still expecting things to be backported. But again, I want to stress the fact that like we haven't really, like, having people to be overly eager about backporting things is a problem that I wish we had more of, but has not really been a historic problem.
Agreed. One of my first instincts was maybe we could just delete the label as well. The other thing I thought maybe in the backport, how to backport to release lines guide, we just add a small note that says kind of like this backporting guide is aimed at backporting to a release line that's in an active state. If it's in maintenance, check with the LTS team before raising a backport or something like that.
I guess like a quick question to people, and like there's a few people on the call who have done backports before. Are you concerned about us just deleting the label? Like, do we think that we're losing something by losing that information?
I'm personally not concerned about that because I mostly use the label to filter out pull requests, not to search for pull requests that I want to backport. But I've never prepared a release for a maintenance branch, so I don't know if that would impact that.
Yeah, so I think with that in mind, like the maintenance releases tend to be like entirely cherry picked. We're not really going through all of the unlanded backports, at least not in my when I've ever had to do it. What about you, Beth?
So yeah, I don't run branch diff or anything for maintenance release. I do just search on the GitHub issue tracker for anything labeled v10.x and land anything relevant from there. I think as long as we have some way, I can imagine there could be a regression in say 14 that we need a backport for 410 to fix a relatively severe issue. So in that case, I guess we could just label it with LTS watch v10.x and manually ping the people. But that's a rare case. We normally know for a maintenance release what needs to go in and know how, like we know to request a backport without having the label kind of thing. The other thing to do would be, could we delete the label and then recreate it after it's been untagged from everything? And then if there is something that needs backporting for maintenance stability, then we could label it again. I'm not against just deleting the label though, because I think we would have other ways of notifying that a specific change needs to be backported to a maintenance release.
Yeah, that seems like a good solution to me.
If there are no objections, then I'm happy to write that in the minutes and happy to action and delete the label. We'll probably need to loop back to the PR that was opened and just say, hey, our process will be that we delete the label, so hopefully this shouldn't happen again, and maybe the updates to the release guide, to the backporting guide aren't necessary. Now we've got that process in place.
Sounds good to me.
Cool. We should probably document that process in somewhere in the release guide as well. I'll try and figure out where.
Is there somewhere where we document how a release is? What's the process to transition a release from active to maintenance?
We don't, but we do have one for current LTS, so we could just change that heading to be like transitioning and then have it under there.
Yeah, it makes sense. We've got the other transitions and the major release in this document that I'm currently reading. So yeah, that makes sense to go in there.
Okay. Would anyone like to pick up that PR, or I can do it if not?
Yeah, maybe. I think I have some updates to this doc anyway.
Okay.
So it might be a little. It won't be straight away, but yeah, I could pick that up.
Okay. Yeah, but yeah, I guess I will take an action to at least respond on the issue that I tagged for the agenda, just to let them know what our plan is. Cool. Thanks, Richard.
Okay.
And then moving on to the next item on the agenda, we have the special treatment for package JSON resolution and exports.
Yeah, no, I've not. So I think there's an action on me to go back to the issue and respond, and I haven't done that. Yeah, sorry.
No worries. And that's everything that was actually on our agenda in 15 minutes. So is there anything anyone wants to talk about now? Or if not, I can start going through and just checking our schedules for the upcoming releases.
I guess one thing I'd add, and I had totally forgotten about mentioning this at the beginning, I think when you called for announcements, December major cutoff date is coming up in less than 2 weeks. So if I recall, and you could tell me if I'm wrong, it's the 22nd, which is the Tuesday, 2 weeks from now. So it's about like 12 days away. And so good for folks to know that if you're looking at landing December major changes, that will go into 15. Get them in before that. There's still an opportunity to get them in afterwards, but it does require TSC approval.
Yeah. And I guess to add an update on 15. So there is a proposal open and a couple of test builds just to kind of smoke test and see how SitGym and things are faring at the moment. We are seeing quite a lot of modules failing their test suites with a deprecation warning, which is the UMass deprecation. And I think, unless it's been fixed recently, running npm install or any npm command also shows that deprecation warning. So I think we need to kind of evaluate whether kind of the ecosystem is ready for us to runtime deprecate this API, or we should delay it. But bearing in mind, this was due to go out in 14, but we opted to doc deprecate it in around March time and said we would runtime deprecate it for 15. So it is kind of like kicking it down a bit, but that could be the right thing to do depending on how the ecosystem can handle the deprecation.
Beth, one thing that might be worth kind of requesting to core, and we can see, I know that when we did the deprecation warnings for buffer, it was extremely disruptive, and I'd be lying if I told you that I'm not getting kind of like waves of this being another one of those. One of the things that we did for the buffer deprecation, if I recall, although I could be mistaken, I believe at one point we made it so that the error, the warning only logged if the warning was within the tree of your application. It didn't warn if it was in your dependencies. And I have a distinct feeling that for the UMask stuff, that may actually be a far better approach for 15, and may kind of like limit the amount of like spurious warnings that are happening all over the place, and also allow, like, it's a lot harder as a project if you're getting that warning because it's like 3 dependencies deep. That's a lot of work to fix. But if it's something that's like directly fixable in your own code base, that's, in my personal opinion, a far simpler problem to deal with.
Yeah, that does sound like a good approach. But I guess my question would be, how do we get enough core person's eyes on it?
Yeah, I guess the thing that would make sense to me, and maybe this is, we need to open an issue about it, or I think James was involved in like that original fancy way of handling the buffer warnings. I kind of think what we need to do is just get a pull request open to implementing this as soon as possible. So I can maybe take the action item of just pinging James right now and seeing if there's historic code on that that he'd be able to dig up. Otherwise, I can do some spelunking and see if I can find the old buffer warning commits that did that.
Okay. Yep. We've still got a good few weeks, 6 weeks or so, I think, before the release. So good to know about these things earlier and try and mitigate the risk to causing any problems in the ecosystem. So it's good. So yeah, the just to finish the update on 15, the PR will be updated every kind of week or so. Up until the 22nd of September, it will just be a copy of master. And then after that point, we will only be cherry picking the minors and the patches into the release line. And at that point, release candidates should start to appear.
Cool.
Awesome. Any other new topics to add on the end before we review the schedules?
No, the only thing I'd mention for anyone looking at the screen but hasn't seen otherwise, there are some security releases coming out on Tuesday. So look out for those.
Yep, thanks, Richard. And I will share my screen just to run through the schedules. So for 14, looks like we're scheduled pretty much up until October. We just have one more unscheduled release before the LTS transition. I guess it's worth saying congrats to Richard for preparing and promoting your first release.
Soon to be second.
Yeah, second, yeah. Lots of practice.
Thank you for the emergency release.
That's fine.
Those are always about as much fun as a bee sting.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think it makes sense to let the streams folk spend a little bit more time ironing out the issues with that commit. So backing it out and perhaps revisiting it at a later date. But yeah, it's just trying to get to a stable state so that those security releases on Tuesday, you know, we haven't suddenly introduced something that's going to break people when they try and update to the security release.
Yeah, I think the only thing I'm curious about, and it doesn't, you know, like I don't totally have the answer for it, is I remember Anna bringing this up in the past about like, hey, if we're reverting things on release lines, we should probably be reverting them on the main branch as well. And I think
the interesting thing with this is originally it was Semver Major, and then Ronag opened a PR to backport it to 14 and took it to the TSC to get approval to bring it back as a Semver Minor.
Oh, it was that one. I didn't realize that it was that same. Okay, so this was more of a like, hey, we reverted it from 14 and it's Semver Major again kind of situation.
Yes, and I know, you know, they're working through some. It looks like there are still some edge cases in the upstream thing on master. Which they're working through. So yeah, that's the only sort of complication into the whole. Should we revert it or not? Because it's obviously breaking, but it might be allowed to break on the next major. You need more input from streams, I think, to make that call as to whether it should be reverted up there or not.
That seems way more reasonable to me. If like we said it was major, we tried to make it minor, it definitely wasn't minor, we reverted it right away. Like this sounds like the right path that we followed then. I didn't realize it was the same change.
Awesome. Okay, thanks, Richard.
Okay.
Cool. For 12, I think, yeah, we're aiming for a minor before it goes into maintenance. But that's based on a release for availability. So if anyone has time, I can probably offer to pair, but probably not offer to pick up the whole release over the September kind of time frame.
I think according to our LTS rules / guidelines that I'm only eligible to do an LTS release 2 weeks after my current release. So
yeah,
that's you know, I could potentially do it, but won't be at least for another 2 weeks.
Yeah, I guess we do aim to have a little bit of baking time. At the moment, it doesn't seem we've got any names to it, so feel free to fiddle with the dates to a date that works for you.
Okay.
And sign up.
Are there minor changes that we absolutely want to have in V12 and that are not yet in the branch?
There's a V8 backport. Where it's not a minor, it's just a patch.
I'm specifically thinking about ESM.
Yeah, I think that there's gonna like, I guess the one thing to keep in mind here is like this is the last minor before maintenance. So I've been trying to find time and have not found time, unfortunately. But I think we do need to do kind of like a full audit just of the ESM stuff to try to get the 12 ESM as close to 14 as possible. There's things we won't be able to get, for example, like top level 08. But I think it's important that we try to get it there. Other than that, like I had a partial list of the minors, but it likely would be a good idea to review all of those minors if we can find time, so that we can ensure there aren't like specific things that we don't want to land. I also think in general, it might be worth a broader conversation here about the timing and the flips that we've done for both maintenance and active. Mostly because I'm having conflicting feelings. On one hand, I'm glad that we're not going to continue maintaining it because it takes a lot of time and effort. And obviously, I think like the lack of getting this specific release out is a great example of like just us not being super on top of it. But at the same time, it also feels like we're missing out on keeping 12 a little bit more up to date if we wanted to have some specific targeted things. So I don't think that we benefit by like making new phases or whatever, but it's like we had 12 months, we had 18 months and 12 months, and now we have 12 months and 18 months. And I'm wondering if like something in the middle, like 15 months and 15 months might be better, where we just have like a little bit more time, where we're maybe not trying to get it out every month, but just a little bit more time where we have the flexibility to release a minor release or a flexibility to do a non-maintenance based release might be helpful. But it's also possible that this is just like I'm feeling that way because of the modules changes. How do people feel about 12 and with where it's at right now?
I kind of feel like it would be nice, possibly to get a few more minors from 14 back into it if possible, and that I probably still feel that way over the next 2 or 3 months. I think part of it at the time was kind of our small group of releases and our ability to backport things that were quite heavily conflicting. So yeah, having the freedom to extend it a little longer but not be committed to having to do a release each month kind of makes sense to me. But I kind of feel like we shouldn't change it for 12 because we've made that commitment quite far back.
Yeah, I would agree with that, and I think maybe like slightly augmenting it for 14 might make sense. I guess like the only thing that I'm concerned about, which we can revisit, maybe add to the agenda, would be continuing to augment our support calendar and how long we do releases, and then like if we have 12 with something completely different than 10 and also something completely different from 14, it just starts to be really confusing for folks who are trying to keep up with like what we do and why we do it.
I guess we do have the kind of escape that our definition of maintenance is that we do allow send for minors, but it's got to be at the discretion of the LTS team to believe that this minor is necessary for migration purposes up to later release lines, or will just help the ecosystem in general.
I'd also, yeah, I guess I would personally be concerned with us becoming too laissez-faire with minors while it's in maintenance, because that hurts our ability to like clearly say no to things when they're like risky or out of scope or problematic. So I like the fact that we've reserved those minors in maintenance primarily for like big problems.
NAPI type stuff as well.
Yeah. And for what it's worth, like, and there's a flip side to this that I think is worth thinking about as well. It's like I have heard feedback from more than one party. And when I say party, I mean like consumers, like both people who are managing runtimes or distribute Node, that being like Debian or certain cloud providers, that the fact that we do minors on LTS actually is hard for them, because keeping up and knowing what they can support is hard. There's module authors, for example, who even though we are putting these minors into 12, if they say they support 12, will support like the lowest minor of the LTS, which creates these kind of like arbitrary API surfaces that they end up supporting. So like we do have our own kind of support story, but various folks are not able to 100% match that. So I do think that perhaps there has been a benefit to us limiting how much we're actively landing features on LTS that some people may appreciate. So I think there may even be something to be said about like, yeah, maybe we would like to have more features on these LTS release lines, but maybe it's just not the right thing to do anyways.
One thing I quite like is at the moment, isn't it 12 months and 12 months for the release phase? Or is it 18? It's 12 and 18, isn't it?
It's 12 and then 18. So I think one of the things that I was suggesting there, which could be splitting it and making it 15 and 15, but then, and actually that may not be bad, but that would like offset the move to maintenance not being around the same time as the LTS. And I think part of the reason we flipped it was that we would only have one active release at the same time. Whereas if we made it 15 and 15, then there would be a 3-month overlap of 2 different active LTS releases. Maybe the answer here just is like, that's what it is. And if you want the new features, you get on the new LTS.
Yeah. It's a good motivation to upgrade and keep current.
Yeah, and that kind of goes back to an issue that was opened recently. Issue 605.
Is this Miguel?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is about basically the fact that a lot of library authors try to still support the maintenance releases until they are just out end of life, and that can be a problem because they will never use the new features until they disappear from all. I mean, until they are available in all Node.js versions.
Yeah. I think this kind of suggested that maintenance should be seen as a something you should start moving off of quite quickly. Whereas for us it's 18 months, so that doesn't really apply in this case because of the length of time something's in maintenance, people have additional time to upgrade and they have to upgrade to get new features.
I think for what it's worth though, and this is something that can be taken with a grain of salt, is different user profiles have different needs. Someone like Michael, who I've known for years, is a bleeding edge kind of individual who cares about features and active stuff. But as I mentioned, with like cloud providers or like Debian or like these other organizations, there are organizations that actually prefer maintenance LTS to active LTS because they don't want new features. They want to ensure that like there is a consistent API surface throughout that life cycle. And to them, that's what LTS means. And in fact, in many other projects, what we call maintenance LTS is far closer to what their LTS programs are like. And it's much more of a like, we're going to fix bugs and we're going to fix security vulnerabilities, but it's stable and you shouldn't expect too many things to change. So I think that we do need to take with a grain of salt here.
But I think Michael would agree with what you said. And I don't want to interpret too much what he said, but I think that his point of view is that we should not push, or maybe no, the opposite. We should push library authors to drop all Node.js versions before they are out of LTS, as soon as they are in maintenance.
Yeah, and I think that's where I'm disagreeing with Michael, because I think that there's a lot of people who like maintenance is the point where they actually would feel the most comfortable with the LTS release.
I'm vaguely recalling I had an action on this one to take to the package maintenance group to I know they've put out some blogs just saying which versions they recommend library authors test against. And at the moment, I believe it includes maintenance, active LTS, and maybe additionally current if people want to check their migration path forwards. So it might be worth having that conversation again, combined with them. I don't think we have any concrete kind of next steps on this other than trying to consider and continue to evaluate our current structure. One thing I would go back to that Miles mentioned, we're already struggling to get 12 releases out. Sorry, we're already trying to get struggling to get 12 releases out. So would extending it make much difference in terms of the features that get back to our users and in their hands? A lot of the miners require backports as well, and I can imagine for 12 we've already got a long list of backport requested PRs too. So even I'm just curious whether even extending the time frame would help, because we might have a struggle getting those features back anyway.
I think the thing is though, we're onboarding more releases, so you know I'm more or less, well, my onboarding is more or less done, other than the small wait to do the LTS releases. But then, you know, there are others coming on board, and we don't know what the effect that's going to be on our ability to maintain branches until probably a couple of months down the line. I mean, it might have no effect. It might cause more things to, you know, so that we have less debt in terms of things landing on branches. We don't know yet. I think part of the challenge we've had is the low number of people that has been doing the work.
Agreed. Okay. Is there anything else to add on this one today? No? Should I just clarify, I think the outcome today, we're going to keep 12 as is. We're not going to make any decisions to push it out, and think about it. Is that correct? No comments?
Sorry, Beth, I wasn't following along with this one, but I do have a question about the 14th release line.
Okay.
Simple one, just having the security release coming out next Tuesday, it doesn't affect the next planned release for the 14th line, right? We don't want to push the date or anything, right?
No, we can just slot an additional one in. You should probably update the table to contain the new release so the numbers all line up. But yeah,
Yeah.
I think previously, a couple of years back, we did try to do a current release every week, and then we downgraded it to 2 weeks. But if we can do an interim one, we do. So.
Sure. Cool. Thanks.
I think even if there's not much content, you know, it doesn't harm, since it will be your first release, for you to go through it all anyway.
Yeah, I was also wondering about Tuesday call. Do we want to go over the security patch, or do we want to start picking up commits to the staging branch for the upcoming release?
It may make sense to use that time to promote the security release, so we can try and time it at the same time. I know Richard and I are doing one, so we could try and coordinate timings. Hopefully, it shouldn't take too long. There shouldn't be too many problems, I hope. So maybe we'd have time as well to start on the 40 next stuff.
Cool. Yeah, that'd be awesome.
Any disclosure issues with that? In terms of, I guess it depends what we're planning to do. If it's just running the promotion steps, that's different from, because not everyone that would be on the mentoring call next Tuesday would have access to the private repo.
Yeah,
Correct.
I guess if it's just promotion, it should be fine.
Yeah, I think just promotion, because the releases should be prepared and available on staging.
Cool.
And the blog, but the release will be promoted by that point. So, okay, we've gone through all of our plans. Any additional topics to talk about before we close out? No? Okay, if not, I'll end the call there and speak to you a bit later.
All right. Bye-bye.
Thanks all.
Yeah.